Mm-hmm.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Anomalies, a show that is about unusual things that we don't always understand, but we're always fascinated by, and we're always happy to have you with us. Today, we have a very special guest, Jason Wolf, who's going to tell us about some really interesting and very important stuff that he has been doing for years, and he has a lot of deep knowledge on. So I'd like to go ahead and begin by giving you a little bit of his background. Is that okay, Jason? You all right with
Yep,
that?
yep.
Okay, let's do this then. So our guest today, Jason Wolf, has always been interested in technology. His formal education includes physics and artificial intelligence studies from MIT, multimedia visual effects and digital design from San Francisco Academy of Art, University of California at Stanford D.School coach. He has worked with companies such as Industrial Light and Magic, Macromedia, CKS Partners, Apple, Pixar, IDEO, Microsoft, and others. Jason is an expert in the fields of UFO, UAP technology, reverse engineering, and/or fabricating current technologies, including free energy technology, where he has researched and built many different free energy devices. Electromedicine technologies, where he started a company that manufactures electromedicine zappers that use tuned electricity to kill virus, moles, and pathogens. He is also an expert in Tesla technology and in alchemy, and is the author of 6 books. In addition, he assists experiencers of anomalous events as Chief Technology Officer of the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. Jason Wolf, welcome to Anomalies.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very
That was a big intro.
What a bio. You took up half the show just going over his
I feel like I'm not going to have a hard time living up to most of that right now.
Well, let's get started with the good stuff here. So,
sure.
A lot of things that you have done throughout your life in technology, it seems mostly like in technology and design. How did you ever start working with the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support with experiencers?
That's a good question, because it's not a thing that's on LinkedIn. They don't post looking for you on the internet, and it's almost in the same category as like a MUFON organization, where people who tend to find that found it because somebody there found them, type of thing. And OPUS was an organization that I had never heard of before I met my wife, and her father had founded it. Probably, I think now it's 30 years old. Mm-hmm. And so when we first met each other, she said, this is what my father does. This is the people that he helps. This is the kind of issues that they face. And so we started talking a lot about it, and he positioned it more, right now I know why he positioned it more as a organization that helps people from a psychiatric point of view, that these people may have conditions that are wrongfully thought as alien abductions. There's something called sleep paralysis, which is super common to mistake as a stranger or an entity broke into my room. I couldn't move. And, he would go, no, you need medication for that. That's an actual physical condition. And as I, got married and further along with the organization, it turns out that it was a very deep organization with lots and lots of members, lots of people that needed support and help. And a lot of those people had a lot of strange technical information. And that was the part that had interested me the most. And so every time something would come up where he's like, he being my father-in-law, Les, would say, I'm working with a person and they sent me a video. I don't know what to do with it. Do you want to check it out? I would run it through either, Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro or some kind of vector scope and just take a look at it from that component of it and say, Les, there's something here. I can see it on the scope, but I can't tell you what it is. And so we were just kind of validating each other and validating the person's stories, or there's absolutely nothing there. The person is completely running amok with you, bail out. So that is how the relationship tended to work. And then it just grew and grew until I kind of accepted a place on the board and got more involved day to day and helped revamp the website and all kinds of just areas of things that they needed and help. And so today, it's humming along really good. And I think the only thing that's keeping it from constantly growing is we look for funding. We're a 501c3 and people donate and we grow a little and we keep going and going and going. And so that's how it all started for me. That was the integration. But the passion of the technology and the area was something that in 1988 was the first indication for me. I started following, I don't even know what it was. It wasn't an internet website. It was today, but I was following this, like, it was called a BBS. It was like a bulletin board service. And I was following something called the Desert Rat, which was a guy who was camping and living outside of Area 51 and just continuously reporting about what he saw. And I just got hooked on that. I just couldn't stop reading it and following it, and got more and more into the culture and started going, what is this? What's going on there? And then applying what people would say, well, I think these things are doing this. And then from my physics kind of background, I'm like, I think they're working like this. And so that was way pre-Opus. So when Opus and I hit heads, it was just luck, I think.
That sounds like tremendous luck.
Yeah.
Definitely tremendous luck for Opus and for all of us who are involved with that organization now.
Yeah.
So a quick question about that is, so how do you feel about this after being involved with Opus and doing all this for a long time? Are you a believer?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, anyone who doesn't, I see three kinds of people. There's people who are like no belief at all, on the fence, and 100%, right? There's kind of this 10%ers that are nothing, 80%ers are like, I tend to feel there is a higher power, and then this 20%. Wait, that's more than 110. That is absolutely positive about it. And people tend to move up that spectrum, right? It's easy to say, hey, go to Gaia, watch Linda Moulton Howe's show, Truth Hunters, and you will move up that spectrum, right? Like her stuff is just revolutionary in terms of proof and data and unquestionable, like, research that she has done. And that's all it really takes, is somebody who's a full denier just getting a chunk of information and going like, whoa. But it doesn't hurt that today the government is also like, yeah, these things exist. Let's just they're in the paper, right? So so now it's been something that for 15 years, I've been around Opus. And I'd say for 14 years, people were like, you guys are crazy. And then the government comes out with all these things, like it's on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Lou Elizondo. These guys are shows on the History Channel. And then now those people who have been around us for 14 years are like, knock, knock, knock. So tell me about this. Like, what's going on? Like, you must know, have you guys heard of this Tic Tac? And we're like, are you serious? Like, so they're bringing stuff to us that we're like, I hate to tell you this, but 4 years ago, I told you about that. And they're like, no way. Like, they're starting, it's a lot of vindication, right? But it's also a lot of vindication for the experiencers. So a lot of the people that were involved with Opus were like, am I crazy? And initially you're like, no, of course not, but we'll see, kind of position, where now it's more like, see, you're not at all. This is happening. Our government has kind of acknowledged it. So let's find out what's going on with you. So I'm sure it brings a lot of peace to people too.
Yes, I definitely think it does. So, well, thank you for what you do. Dave, how about you? I'm sure you've got a lot of questions.
Okay. I got a full page of notes already just for that. I want to know, you touched on so many things. Let's start with a place that I wouldn't normally start, and that's kind of in the synchronicity area. I'd like to jump right into evidence and things that I know you're good at, analysis. But I'm going to go to what seems to be a clear synchronicity with you marrying his wife and getting into this. I mean, how likely is that Or do you think that you were just going to end up here anyway? Because that's what
No,
happens to a lot of us. We end up here anyway. There would have been different routes, but sometimes you have a clear path and you have to really look at that and go, hey, what's going on there?
I mean, I 100% agree. I know exactly what you mean. You know, there's people out there in my life that I'm like, this person is leading the wrong life. No amount of telling them this, do you really think this is a good idea? Does anything. 10 years later, they're in a car accident.
Yeah.
God forbid something happens to them. And then they turn into the person that you were like, I was hoping that would happen in a much softer, gentler way. So, but I don't think I would have been in the aspect of the human support side at all. Right. Because I mean, I have Tesla's Colorado Springs notes, and I'll just stay up and lose track of time and read stuff like that. And then I'll think I can go in the garage and try and put some of this stuff together. And it always led to, you know, videos and tinkering and getting involved with other people from build perspectives. And, you know, I've had PG&E at my house where I was like, can you take my house off the power grid? And they're like, boom, they put on like the wireless power meter instead, right? Like things like that. And so it's weird because Les and I are like opposite ends of the same thing. Like I never had a way in. Like people like Bob Lazar or Lou Elizondo or Les or even like George Knapp. Those are the people that I watched that were talking about those things. And then there was this world of people who I knew. There's like a free energy conference where the Bedinis were big at, and it happens, I think, once every other year, like in Utah. And these are the people who don't talk, that just stand around in a room going like, looking at a device, taking notes. And then a year later come back and they're like, oh, I got it working now. And it's 14 feet high. And so there was always these two extremes. And Opus was the first time that I felt like I met people who like talked about things that had happened to them that were really traumatic, but also would tell me like, I met a woman who lives in Oregon, and she would tell me all this stuff. Like I have all this technical pieces of paper that I would sketch and draw and write, and I have no idea if it's stupid, or if somebody like who knows anything about nuclear science would look at it and be like, this is revolutionary. And so, you know, I'm like, well, what do you do today? And she's like, I don't know. I became a lawyer, and I have a really hard time relating to men or women, and I can't have relationships. Right. So they have these very unusual, that happened after my experience kind of thing. And I would have never gone down that road. Right. And so there was a moment in my life where I studied transcendental meditation for a really long time, like 10 months. And this was through my mom. She was a channeler when I was young, and people would always be in my living room crying when I'd come home from school. And my mom was like, that person's never going to be able to be ballerina, just these crazy things. And so she got me into that kind of, there is something other than the external reality that science tends to only view, like, oh, this is metal, this is plastic, that's all there is. But if you close your eyes, the world that you can't see is more like 99% of the remainder of the universe. And that was the missing component for me from a technical perspective. And that it's kind of like that area that Opus lived in.
So you were kind of primed for, I mean, that was kind of really what I was getting at. You were kind of primed just because of your upbringing. And it seems like, you know, judging by the paths of various guests we've spoken with here, I think this is the 93rd show or something. So we got a few under our belt. We talked to a lot of different people, and the common thread is, I think, is that either there was a family history of what we might call paranormal or experiences, whatever type of experiences, multiple different ones that kind of fit under the same umbrella, or you just kind of stumbled across something one day and it sent your life shooting off in this direction. That was kind of my path, because I didn't really have spiritual influences. My family wasn't, spiritual in any particular way. I didn't have experiences myself, but I can point to a specific day when I went careening off this direction.
Yeah.
So I'm always wondering how our guests feel about, do you feel like you were compelled to go that way at some point, or do you feel like, yeah, I just kind of stumbled into it? And most people say, nah, I kind of felt like I was on that trajectory.
I was 100% on that trajectory. And for me, there were two very strange incidences.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, there's usually one, which was like, oh, this happened to me, and I started automatic handwriting, and I became a channeler. And Opus, you know, with the Opus interview series too, we've met people. Les will do interviews with people who are psychics or channelers or mediums or people who will try to help on a therapeutic level, but also on a clairvoyant level. So clairvoyant therapy was something I got like really into, which was kind of like you're just hanging out with somebody, chit-chatting, nothing's wrong, my life is great, my kids are happy, but I don't know why I can't be happy. And then you just pick up on like, I'm going to ask you a direct question, you know, does your husband hit you? And then that would be the thing, right? They just would swirl around this. And so from that type of work comes this type of like awakenings or these breakthrough moments or things like that. And so that was always the kind of thing my mother was doing. And when I was young, I was like very repelled by it, because I think I was just a teenager who was very repelled by their parents. Like, no matter what, if she was a good cook, I'd be like, I can't stand that. It didn't matter what it was. So, but once I became a normal person again around 24, it was something that I was like, huh, this is very interesting. You know, I started studying it more and more and more. But I've always had that kind of experiences that were in there. But I also had an experience when I was younger. My grandfather was a well driller. And so he worked with drilling water wells for residential homes, 2 to 10-inch wells, irrigation. So we worked with dynamite and electricity and welding equipment and plumbing and electrical. And I got shocked a few times, like electrically shocked, just like knocked on my ass kind of shocked. And it got to the point where I got like really interested in getting shocks. I was like, whoa, like, you know, and he'd always teach me, like, when you're working with electricity, you can't work with both hands. So we would wiring up systems, and he's like, no, one hand behind your back when you're using a screwdriver. So when the current would never pass over your heart. So it was always shocking the crap out of like 2 fingers, or like my elbow would touch the wall and I wouldn't realize it. And it got to the point where I could tell the difference between like 110 and 220, like just using my hand. And I got this weird like affinity and like connection to like electricity and gravity and the kind of spiritual aspect of the like inner operations of nature, and which led me into science and like kind of cracking open this veil behind reality, but still trying not to break away too far from what still was scientific. Because you can easily take one step and people are like, that's paranormal, that's not normal, or that's there's a term for physics, metaphysics. You're not in physics. I heard this all the time. People would be like, that's not physics, that's metaphysics. We don't use crystals. We use aluminum to, and you're like, okay, got it. So
well, once you hit that point where you want to understand the algorithm or the template that underlies our 3D reality that we're all used to, and we get so used to that a lot of people don't even question what's underneath it. You know, whether you believe in a creator or not, there are definitely some laws, some templates that drive things, that make things, and someone of your mind, clearly you're a tinkerer and a problem solver, and I want to understand how this thing works so much that I'm willing to shock myself literally, because I want to know how this stuff works.
Absolutely.
We need, I think when I say we, I mean the paranormal community, the metaphysical community, whatever. We need more people who can mix those two types of thinking, very analytical, and also the curiosity and acceptance that there's an underlying thing that may not follow the laws of physics
Yeah.
it may generate the laws of physics.
That's a good point, because I
And
don't know how much I've studied physics and how much I'm like, the more I learn, I'm just like,
well, you're a computer guy though,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
mean,
exactly.
so
Yeah,
it's
I
the
work in
same.
AI. Yeah,
Yeah, you know what
yeah,
programming is,
yeah,
and since you mentioned AI,
yeah.
let's just jump into that
Sure.
world,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the invent of Chat GPT and things going
Mhm.
mainstream, what is it, Dolly, and what's the
Yeah.
other
Mid
AI
journey.
the imagery?
There's Dolly. There's Mid Journey.
Yes,
Yeah,
Mid-Journey. I
yeah,
When I saw Mid-Journey, I about
yeah.
fell out of my chair because I'm
I
like,
know.
wait a minute.
Well, so now it's been commercialized into the Adobe Photoshop. So the next version of
Yeah.
Adobe Photoshop, I've played with it a little. It's prompt based, just like
Hmm.
ChatGPT. So you can open up an
Exactly.
image, you can circle an area, and you can type, put a sign there, and it's like it'll just pop it right into the field. And then you can circle a person, and you're like, erase that person and put a horse, and it just flips it into it. So
Yeah, and Gwen, I mean, Gwen said, "Well, Dave, you can ask the technical
yeah,
question on this because I'm a super geek and into it."
yeah,
She's more on the personal side, which is I'm not as good at because I'm such an analytical person. But this is where those things kind of meld, I think, because now we're talking. You can have a computer, you can have AI generate the best sounding pop song or
yeah.
the most beautiful image, worthy of the highest esteemed museums or something, and most humans won't be able to tell the difference. Uh,
Yeah. Like right now
and
they can't.
we've
Yeah.
hit that point where that is going to create a whole lot of opportunity, but it's also going to create a whole lot of problems. And I bring this up in relation to the UFO issue because, and see what, if you agree with me, Jason, that as far as I'm concerned, no image or video since, say, 1990 something can be trusted anymore. I mean, you have to look
Yeah.
back before 90 or
I would say at the point at which I could make images that were convincingly fake was
Mhm.
Industrial Light and Magic, right? So we were making
Yeah.
films.
And is that Lucas?
Lucas, yeah. So I
Lucas
worked at
Film.
Lucas
Yeah.
Valley.
But
I'd go up to
Star
the
Wars
ranch.
and everything
I
else.
wasn't back that far. I like the first film I worked on was Willow. So you're
Yeah, that was
talking
a
like,
long
yeah, it was like
like,
89.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
that Lucas, I mean,
but
that's
the
the
point,
standard
my
in the
my
industry,
point
right?
is that the standard in the commercial consumer industry space was Lucasfilms,
Yeah.
and the government was still like 20 years ahead of them.
Mm,
Like their technology that they were using for image scaling, degaussing, all kinds of that stuff. Like they had algorithms and they had people that were writing that kind of stuff more for like the security, surveillance, and satellite imagery stuff. It was way more advanced. Lucas was just really good at more of this kind of compositing technology. There was actually a physical piece of hardware called a Pixar, and it was a layering system of kind of like putting, it was a compositing system. Let me take a little bit of that person and put them in this new background, and it could. And so the government didn't have that stuff so much. They weren't so interested in like manipulating audio and video to look fake, but like the film industry was, but they were interested in analyzing, changing resolutions, all that kind of stuff. And when they started putting that stuff together, it was over. Like in like 97, I was producing images that I would show to friends, and they're like, no way, you have a Ferrari? And I'm like, yes, I do. Like, and they couldn't tell, like,
yeah.
so yeah, like around like 2000, I was like, there's nothing out there that I like believe anymore. It's super scary.
Exactly. And so how do you see that fitting? I mean, what can we now use, being an evidence-based person as I am and as Gwen definitely is? I mean, we're looking for evidence. We're looking for
Yeah. I
term.
think
We're
that
looking for
like
proof. What do we have left?
it sucks. The only thing like in my brain, like 99% of the time, I'm like, I don't even bother with the news. I'm not going to watch it because I look at that and go, oh my God, that's horrible. I feel so No, I don't. Wait a second. I could render that. I could
Yeah.
render that. And I'm telling my wife, I'm like, could you just put on like Wheel of Fortune? I don't even care what else, right? That's more informative than
Yeah.
CNN at this point right now. So the thing is that she's asked me that before. She's like, well, how do we know? And I'm like, we have to go there.
Yeah.
I'm like, we have to go to that location. I was like, if we drive to Spokane, I'll bet you there is not a riot, like and then you think that you start going, oh, I could put together a little network where somebody in Spokane could report back to me and I can collect it. I can do that in Chicago and I can do this here. And then the internet controls the internet. The internet is controlled by the government. So all of a sudden people are posting videos. You reach out to your little network over the United States, like, hey, has anybody actually seen this happening? And then their videos could be blocked. They could be censored. And so then you're like, well, that didn't work. They can't, I was watching Joe Rogan like 2 nights ago, and the Tic Tac pilot, the pilot who flew the Navy Super Hornet, was on Joe Rogan. And he's like, I have the video that we shot with the FLIR chasing the Tic Tac. And Joe Rogan was like, I don't, he like stopped his podcast for a second. He's like, I don't think I can show that. So they're like, has this been released? And they're like, yeah, the Pentagon released it. He's like, I am literally on the fence with YouTube every day about almost losing access because of stuff I keep showing.
Yeah.
And so sure enough, he found that it had been released, and then they started showing it, and the pilot started talking them through the actual video. And he was like, I hope they don't cancel this episode. He's like, it's happened to me before. They just turn off an episode. And so physical proof is like the only way. And then it's difficult to move around. You get an electric car and you do something wrong, and somebody can just type on a keyboard and stop your electric car. So that's why there's a big movement to get everyone on electric cars. We can shut them off electronically. You can't fly unless you follow some kind of mandate and have a vaccine passport. And so it's very, very interesting. Like, it's super difficult to get the truth,
Well, let's go. You mentioned Linda Moulton Howe, who I believe is
she's on our board.
Fabulous. She is a bulldog, if there ever was one. She just is relentless in her pursuit, and she's 70 something.
She's 80.
Is she 80?
I think she's 80. Yeah.
It's unbelievable how relentless she is, and we need more people like her, of course. But I was hoping that you would talk about the Linda Moulton Howe view of I think is
of her world
of UFOs, other intelligences, versus somebody like Stephen Greer, who tends to be
he's just I'm not, the vote is still out on that guy, right? Like he tends to be like, I have all the answers, it's all coming, it's right behind this curtain, it's incredible, you have to see it, but in order for me to do this stuff, it's there's a lot of infrastructure, so I'm going to need 99.95, and I'm going to let you behind this curtain, and then the curtain opens, and it's more questions, it's more. So I don't think it feels like his heart's in the right place, but it's almost like this commercialized version of it, as opposed to just natural disclosure, right? So I worked with a guy accidentally. His name was Joe Firmage, and I
know the name. I don't remember. But just
that's the thing. And everyone knows the name. Yeah, exactly. Everyone knows the guy's name, but doesn't know what happened to him. So I worked at a company called CKS Partners, which was a big design agency, and our founder, it's not big, there was like 80 of us, and the founder was best friends with Steve Jobs. And so we serviced everything just for Apple and Pixar, and interacted with this guy like on a weekly, daily basis sometimes. And then he started asking us to do technical things for Apple. And he's like, I'd love it if you guys could just build out the whole website. And we were like, that sounds like a lot of money. We should do that. And so we partnered with a company called US Web that was run by a guy named Joe Firmage. So the two companies came together. We renamed the organization March 1st. And Joe Firmage became our CEO. I hadn't met him at the time, but he was all around, the swirling. He goes and rings the NASDAQ bell, announces this big partnership. We're now like a 5,000 person company, because they had all the back end IT infrastructure and we had the front end design, and we were just going to like dominate. And we were buying up all the internet little design shops everywhere. So we bought up Organic and all these places in the Bay Area. And there was a deal that was put in place, the actual legal contract, where there was something like 30 lawyers at Wilson Sonsini hanging around in Palo Alto with a 3,000 page contract to put everything together. And they called me and said, could you come to this law firm? It's a Monday. You'll probably be here till Wednesday, spending the night at the law firm. Once the deal is, we're going to put together a whole bunch of stuff, press releases, change things on the website. We're going to order up some t-shirts. We're doing a Wall Street Journal press or announcement. And so for the 3 days, Joe Firmage was a no-show. Like he just never showed up. And people were literally like, well, it's day 2. I can't get a hold of him. Does anybody know where this guy is? He did not show. He shows up like 2 days later, just walks in and goes in front of like 80 people. And he's like, is this the contract? And we're like, yeah. And the guy's like, it's a stack of paper that's like 15 inches high. And he goes, is the signature page on the bottom? And they're like, yeah. So like 2 guys help him lift it off and he just signs it and walks out.
Oh.
And then he proceeds to not be around for a month. Nobody knows where he is. We can't find him. And he shows up on the picture. He shows up on the cover of like the San Francisco Chronicle, handing a booklet of paper to Bill Clinton at like a $25,000 a night dinner. And it says, tech CEO hands UFO manifesto to Bill Clinton. And then everyone at the company was like, what are you talking about? Like no clue what he was talking about. So he comes back in. My office was next to his. I see him one day and I'm like, knock, knock. Hey, what is going on? Like, how's it going? And he looks 60 years old. He was younger than I was. He was like 31 at the time. He looked like he was like 65. And I said, so just curious, everything cool? And he's like, no, it's not cool. It's not. And he goes, I'm just going to lay it out to you right here. He's like, the night I was supposed to go and sign the document, he's like, a purple orb came into my window. It went inside of me. It gave me a completely new view of the outlook on the world and the universe and this and that. And he's like, I know what the most important thing is now. It's not any of this. Oh. And I've resigned it. The company was $1 billion company. And he probably made $700 million off of the deal personally. And he's like, I've resigned. He's like, that dude, Tom Suter and those guys, they'll be running the place. And he's like, but I want you to come and work for my company. It was called like, I'll have to look it up. Like if you look up Joe Firmage on the web, you'll find he was interviewed in Rolling Stone magazine as like, they called him the Fox Mulder of Silicon Valley, right? Because it was like, but it was something like, it was Project Voyager. So he spent all of his own personal money and hired all these physicists, like 30 of them from all over the United States, put them in a room and said, solve the problem of anti-gravity. And I'm going to pay you to do that. And they kept working and working and working on it. And he kept getting them funding. And through him, I contracted with him. I never left the company. I met Robert, somebody who started the Disclosure Project. And so the first Disclosure Project film, I was an editor on it. And it was shown in San Francisco. And I kind of got roped into the Disclosure Project. And then along comes Stephen Greer, who was kind of like this weird outsider. He was almost like this police officer of the UFO community. Like he wears a sidearm around his house, and so it was a very strange, I always thought like this guy was an agent of disinformation. But at the same time, I was like, but he's telling us a lot of information that we don't know. So, and he was like, I got this for you kind of thing. So like, every time I interact or see his stuff, I'm always like totally cautious. I never really have a good sense of who are you helping? Like, who's this serving? Like for $99.95, I can watch your show on iTunes, but then I really don't, I'm just entertained. I don't walk away going, oh, that's how I run a hydrogen generator off my house and I can unplug from the grid. Perfect.
Well, let's switch gears from Greer. Gears from Greer. There's a periodical called Infinite Energy. Have you?
Yeah,
that's been going
for 25, 30 years.
Yeah, close to 30 years. I think I have every issue. and I
Yep.
await the issue coming in my mail,
Yeah.
back when we used to have things delivered in the mail. It still comes in the mail, but
Yeah.
I wait because I wanted to rip that open,
Yeah.
see what someone finally gave us, the infinite energy, the
Yeah.
0 point
Right.
free energy machine, over and over and over, literally for decades. It just never came.
Yeah. It's
And
almost
so
always there.
I
Yeah.
want to ask you, because you've dropped
Yeah.
a lot of names that I've heard through the years, and I've
Yeah.
wondered, where the hell did they go? What happened to that group?
Mhm.
What happened to their project? Did they run out of money? Did they die? Did
Yeah.
they get
Yeah.
cancer? Did they get canceled? Whatever things happen to these people who get involved in the energy field, the free energy, starting maybe as far back as Tesla or before.
Yeah.
We got a lot of people that I'm sure you could talk about with the N machines and the
Bruce De Palma and those guys.
brown,
Brown
whatever.
gas.
Yeah, brown. There's just so much stuff. You mentioned Bedini.
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah.
the Italian guy? Uh, what's his name? The guy who's probably a fraud, but who is stuck around for Rossi.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep. I think it's Rossi.
I
That's
think it's Rossi.
yeah.
I have kind of lost track of him, but I got an email, or something. Apparently I'm still on his email list, and I got something a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
He's still pushing that thing. He was a convicted,
Like scammer.
scammer. He scammed the Italian government or something, but he insists he has that machine. And then of
Yeah.
course there's the two big ones in my mind. I'm just throwing them out here so you can riff on it for as long as you
Yeah.
want. Brilliant light energy, or brilliant light
Mhm.
power now. Used to be a different name that I can't remember at the moment. And then Orion up in Ontario, Canada, they both claim brilliant light energy, brilliant light power is
Yeah.
saying that they've got something, hydrino, that he's able to shrink the hydrogen, the orbits of the electron,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
to a point that's below what science accepts right now, and he's therefore extracting, we're calling 0 point energy out of that, creating energy and then capturing it with what do you call it? A solar collector,
Yeah.
concentrating that energy, and you're getting more energy out than you're putting in. Orion is saying that they're basically, you mentioned alchemy earlier, they're able to transmute elements, and their
Yeah.
first effort is going to be remediation of nuclear waste. And
That's noble. Sure.
that's the tack they're taking.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you talk about what seems promising, I mean, I
Yeah.
know there are a lot of projects
That's
that
a
have
good question. Yeah.
come and gone, but I want to know, because you're so involved in this stuff, what's
Yeah.
promising? What
I
can
mean,
we expect?
so you have to look at it from the perspective of what do you want to do, right? Because if you want to do something personally, there are ways of just unplugging your house from the grid and then just disappearing.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the Bruce De Palma story. Like his what was it called? N drive, or I
Was it
can't,
Bruce or Brian is his brother?
yeah, but
Brian his brother, who
Bruce
is
De Palma
the
was at MIT.
filmmaker, right?
I don't know. Like I
I
only
think
know
he made some very famous films. Brian De Palma,
yeah, so yeah. So
right? Gwen.
that's why Bruce De Palma he's always got like really good film footage of himself. I think it's because of his brother. Bruce was an MIT grad, I think in the 50s, something like that. And his machine was like the N drive, but basically, like it's as simple as if you have a wire that you move through a magnet, it creates a current. And he turned it around and made like a Faraday disc where he was like spinning a magnet, and the magnet was giving out massive amounts of amperage, but very, very low voltage. And so he kind of came up with a way of, oh, I can turn this thing, which will make way more amperage than I'm using to turn this thing, and literally created what he would. Nobody uses the words perpetual motion because it's so heated, but essentially he made a machine that would power itself. But I mean, like It's really weird because I don't believe in perpetual motion, because even if you find a machine where you're like, hey, magnets are powering this thing, it will run its own motor, which was turning this wheel. The magnets still have a life of like 700 years. They will actually wear out. A magnet will wear out. So even by the definition of science, you're like, well, it's not perpetual motion, but it should last about 800 years. And you're like, okay, yeah. So
Well,
so
close
he
enough.
so he was his world, there's these two worlds of inventors. They are killed. Once you reach about 300% efficiency, the government will just knock you off. Or
Well, see, that's where brilliant light
yeah,
power is at the moment. They're
right,
claiming 3 to 4 to 5 in their validation
100%.
reports.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So
Three, three
around
times the
that
energy
time,
input. Yeah.
so you basically have this route. I built it, it works, and I'm gone. I built it, and I tried to patent it, and the patents kick off all kinds of red flags with the government. At first, they'll just say like, your machine didn't work. And you're like, but I wasn't in there when you were testing it. We got a room full of scientists. We guarantee you it did not work.
Yeah.
Patent denied. And then you keep pushing it, and you keep pushing it, and you keep pushing it and pushing it. And then you're like Stan Meyer. He ran his car off of water,
Yeah.
which is completely possible. It's super easy. It's not a complicated thing at all. He went nuts with this. He drove a car around the road that said, water powered car. He was on the local news. He was trying to find manufacturers. He was actually inventing a spark plug that had a hole in it that the gas was vaporized and blew through the spark plug, and the spark plug itself was doing the electrolysis. So he was making components that would just literally run the car off of water. He got the government got involved, and he told his family, he's like, we're meeting at this diner. These two generals are going to come in, and I think this is it. This is the big deal. And he ran out of the diner yelling, they poisoned me. And he died like in the parking lot.
Wow.
And so that's Stan Meyer's story. And then the Bedinis, there's like this brilliant dude who worked with John Bedini, Tom Bearden. He's a nuclear physicist.
Is he still around?
I think he's still alive. So he's still alive, but basically he's in this part of his life where he's like, I'm just surviving. I'm not a media person anymore. So Tom Bearden was the nuclear physicist who was like, I know how all this stuff works. And John Bedini was the machinist who probably had like the least amount of education, but could do things that nobody else could do mechanically. So, Tom Bearden was like, this guy will close his eyes and put together a motor, right? It was nothing for him. So it wasn't that he was unintelligent. He was a Navy radio operator, and he did classified communication systems in the Navy, where Tom Bearden was a nuclear physicist. So he couldn't build anything, but he knew how everything worked. John Bedini could build anything and didn't know exactly how everything worked. So you put these two guys together. They fundamentally dissected one of Tesla's patents by replicating a guy who lived in California from the 1920s, who learned that if you split electricity and stopped using the negative side and just use the positive side, you split the positive, you could excite in the 0 point energy a response back that came back greater than your excitation. And this actually happened to Tesla a lot. So Tesla put together a lot of people were killed. Tesla put together generators for Niagara Falls. And these huge generators were spinning because of water coming down through the falls, but people would shut them off with these giant knife switches, and this enormous spike of electricity would come out and electrocute the operators. And so Tesla needed to figure out, like, how can we stop killing people with this? Because what fundamentally what they were killing people with didn't make any sense. Like, where's this spike of electricity that's coming from that's so massive? It turns out everyone has electricity wrong. We have no idea in our heads. It's completely in our heads wrong. Electricity is a state, like if you have a battery and a light bulb and you use the battery to push electricity to a light bulb and it lights up, we think the battery is powering the light bulb. But in most cases, what's really happening is you're pushing an energetic field into the vacuum, and the vacuum is squeezing back, trying to re-equalize the space that you just created. And the vacuum is actually adding the energy into the system. And so Tesla learned that he turns on his generator, it sends down a pulse of electricity, and then he shuts it off. And when he shuts it off, the energy from the vacuum would come back and re-equalize through these wires. And the volt that would come out would be 10 times greater than the volt he was putting in to keep the line going. So people started realizing, wait, and you could do this. If you take a wire that's like 100 feet long and you energize it and you cut off the current, you will get a shock back that's bigger than what you were using in it. Because the vacuum, when you squeeze, the vacuum is kind of equalized to stable. And when you send electricity into it, you kind of create a field around it. And when you cut off that field, instead of giving it a place to mitigate slowly, when you just snip it, it'll collapse in and often reverberate for a minute. And that reverberations are seen as these spikes. And those spikes are what the Bedinis were capturing. And there's a book of thermodynamics I remember in school, like Second Law of Thermodynamics, page like 258. It was like, there's this one instance of over unity that can be registered with sharp magnetic gradients. And it was like one paragraph. And I'm like, wait a second, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. Did you
Like,
find a loophole here, or?
Yeah, it was like, so if I take a magnet
say?
and I just like whip it through wires,
Yeah.
and it does actually happen. So if you have a wire and you pass a magnet really quickly in front of it, you can get a spike that mathematically exceeds like the energy that you were using. And that's what was happening in his electrical systems. So the Bedinis use a wheel, which has magnets around it, and they have a coil of wire. When you spin it, the magnets passing over the coil are inducing spikes that are upwards of like 800 volts that are charging batteries. So what they do that's amazing is they took a coil of wire. I'm going to show you what they did. Hold on. I'll use my face. Wait 1 second.
So this is Bedini, Bedini, right?
Yeah.
For people to look up. Stan Meyer, is that Meyer or M-E?
Yeah, I think it's Mayer.
M-A, okay, that's right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of publications on him, like television interviews, news sources. The Bedinis, John Bedini, like when I met those guys, I was like, so have you ever had like any issues with your devices? Because they're over unity devices. They just create energy in a reversed way. The polarity comes out backwards. And so people have a lot of trouble trying to get them into like scaling models. So while they work and sit there and spin, it's difficult to extract the over unity component from it. Yeah. So they're fun. They work. They will charge batteries. They will actually reconstitute batteries from a junkyard because they can desulfate the plates because of the high pulses. And to not deviate too much, these guys, Tesla invented alternating current. Thomas Edison invented DC current. DC current loss, it wouldn't travel very far. AC current was superior because it could travel super far, but it had an inferior component, which is that the frequency it vibrated at would electrocute and kill humans. So it propagated everywhere. Everyone loved it. It wasn't an issue. It's out there. And Tesla went, oh, wait, there's something better. And that, wait, something's better. It never got out there. It's called pulsed DC. So he went to PWM, pulsed width modulation, and it's the pulsing high voltage pulses of DC current, single wire, high voltage, and the magnetic rotors and motors like that, they pulse DC. And so these magnets that are passing over coils are basically going on, off, on and off, on and off really fast with these extremely high spikes on an oscilloscope and then moments of pause. And those high spikes going into a battery will desulfate the plates and reconstitute completely dead batteries. You can take a Bedini motor, take for free every broken battery from the junkyard and reconstitute them as brand new, then sell them to the world if you wanted to. But it's not a very lucrative thing here. I forgot what I was going to draw while I got my.
Yeah. Well, you can think about it. Can I jump in and ask a couple
Yes,
questions here?
please.
Yeah, let's kind of shift our path a little bit.
Sure.
I have two questions I want to ask. The first one is, I'm going to ask you, what do you think about the Montauk project?
Yeah. Okay. So Montauk I always mix up Montauk and Philadelphia Experiment.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Montauk was not the ship.
Right.
I don't remember the Montauk.
Montauk was done several years after the shift. That was in like 49 or something like that. And then whenever the government got involved in developing the atomic bomb, they stopped and went undercover apparently and did Montauk. So the Montauk project, I understand, was on Montauk Point, which is up over the
Montauk
East Coast.
Island, yeah.
Island. And there was something there. There was a military base there called Point Hero or something like that it was built on. Supposedly what they were doing there was not so much time travel, but it was psychological influencing, trying to figure out how they could control people's minds. Does that kind of ring a bell?
Boom, I got it. Okay, so that is what Stranger Things was based on. If you dig, Stranger Things based a lot of their stories on the Montauk project. And I think a big chunk of that had originated from the CIA with the was it called Stargate? The remote viewing projects, right? They were looking for ways of amplifying that stuff. So, I mean, I think first of all, I have no doubt that those kind of things actually existed, but it's super difficult to know how much and what really happened today. And so for me, like, those are super fun stories for me to follow and study. And then to some degree, I'll hear like technical aspects of things like, oh, so they put these things on somebody's brain and then changed the frequency and altered their states, and they could remote view things on Mars. And I'm like, that sounds totally feasible to me. Like I literally, like, because things like that have happened with people on drugs, LSD projects or DMSO type products. And then all of a sudden you're like, I had an out-of-body experience. And while I was there, I saw this person who was wearing a blue tie, and the person was there wearing like a blue tie. Inducing that kind of stuff electronically, to me, that's a no-brainer, because that's how our bodies work anyway. Like, we may be jacked into a simulation right now, right? And they're just messing around with that on that level. But there's another channel I love called the Y-Files, and they have a great episode on the Montauk. And that's where most of my information came from, those guys. And so
I just finished.
But it's kind of scary too. Like, because some of it was scary. Like, I think it went into the realm of like, we punched open this portal, this thing, and like these other dimensional kind of things came out, and we were like, sorry about that.
Yeah, apparently there was a story where they just really decided to just go all for it and fire up whatever their power was to the max, and it opened up a portal that they supposedly have photographs of some kind of a beastie coming through that was kind of a Sasquatch creature, but huge. And that was a problem. That's like, okay, shut that down.
I mean,
do that again.
So it's a 100%, because here's why. So there's this thing called the electromagnetic spectrum, right? At one end is like microwaves, the other one's like gamma rays, and in between is the visible spectrum. It's the bandwidth that we can see, that we actually call the substantial universe. It's our visible spectrum is 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. So if you shift down just a little bit and become like a bumblebee, the world is completely different looking. You're seeing like ultraviolet. And if you shift down even further, like, who knows what you'll see. Be like, oh shit, that thing's been standing there the whole time. Like, and then you shift back to our visible spectrum and you're like, no, it's not, it's gone. And we blazingly declare like we understand the universe, and we can't input more than 1% of it at a time. Like, we don't even have the bandwidth in our body to handle that. And so I just, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I
No.
didn't want to lose this thought. But you brought up a good point about look at the Webb telescope, which is all through the
Yeah.
news now. And a lot of the images you see are not in visible wavelengths. They're in
Yeah.
ultraviolet or
Yeah.
infrared or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, that's there
Yeah.
on this gigantic cosmic scale.
Totally.
If we don't even see galaxies, you know,
Yeah.
that are huge and, you know,
Yeah.
right there, it's no wonder we don't see things around us. And that makes me reminds me of another thing I wanted to ask you about, because you said that one of your specialties or one of your interests was kind of the biological end of this,
Yeah.
treating. There was a book I have. Was it
Biocentrism or
Hulda
something.
Clark?
Hulda Clark, Cure for All Diseases.
Yeah, and
Yeah. So
when I first read that, I was fascinated by it, but then I remember there was some reasons that I said, "Oh, I don't believe it," or something, because if
yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, I think the way she determined what frequency these, you know, these organisms were at, it was not an objective way to determine it. She just said this disease was caused by this, and therefore those organisms are at, or this bacterium is at this particular hertz or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's been a long time. So I wanted you to comment on your
Yeah.
knowledge in that
So
area.
basically, this woman was a government-backed, government-granted researcher with a
And did I get her
medical.
name right?
Yeah, Hulga, like
Oh,
HL,
Holga with a G.
like it's like HULGA
Yeah.
Clark, something like, you know. And so she was like a 1979 medical doctor, government-backed researcher who was responsible for finding the resonant frequency of viruses, molds, pathogens, funguses. And so she was using some kind of like resonant, it's not complicated, right? So if you, because you figure these things are so tiny, you're like, how can you measure the frequency that they vibrate at? Well, if you think about it, like this is doing the same thing. Like there's a piece of metal in there that as I talk, it's vibrating and it's making an electrical signal, that electrical signal is being sent through the wires digitally and making a speaker move. So if you shine like a laser at an object, even a window, that's how we use spying devices. You shine a laser at a window, somebody inside talks, the window vibrates, the laser moves, and we can hear them. So you can do that on a tiny, tiny level. So she was using electricity to send in a particular frequency, and you can listen for the resonant kind of response. So that means you can work at the atomic level or the subatomic level. So she would basically test everything, like from flies. Like she was testing physical things first, like flies and mosquitoes and bugs, and finding their resonant frequency. And she got the idea of like, how small can I go? So she started testing viruses and bacteria and found that they, as entities, had resonant frequencies. And she started cataloging it. And most of her book, The Cure for All Diseases, like 80% of it is just the resonant frequencies of those things. Like you can look up the resonant frequency for the AIDS virus. You can look up the resonant frequency for like a cancerous cell.
And that's all legitimate and replicable.
Yeah. So that was the research the government was paying her to do. But what happened was she said, anything that has a resonant frequency, if you put that frequency in and turn the amperage or turn up the amplitude, it will destroy it. And that's what happens with humans. You put your finger in a light bulb socket, you get the shock and it resonates, and the electricity travels through your system and kills you. So she started learning that everything that she found the resonant frequency of, if she sent the same resonant frequency in and turned up the voltage, like to nothing, like 9 volts, it would destroy itself. So she was like, this is a no-brainer. If I can make a device. Oh, and then she found that everything that was bad existed between a relatively narrow frequency band. Like on that level of the size that they were, everything from like 0.1 to 30,000 hertz was where all the bad stuff was. And she's like, that was way outside the scope of a human body. We resonate around like 2.9 million hertz, or, you know, it's something crazy. So she's like, this resonant frequency, all these bad things live within this realm. Why not just sweep that whole frequency? And And she knew that it only needed like a very small amount of voltage that had a high frequency. So she got with like a radio guy who was like, all you need to do that is a 555 timer, these two little capacitors, a couple little diodes, hook up a 9-volt battery and hold on to these electrodes, and you can feel the tingle, and it will kill like the flu virus in you. So the technology in Japan and Germany are class 1 medical devices. You can go to a doctor and say, I don't feel well, and put your hand on these metal plates, and they're like, you have the influenza virus in you. Hold on a second, and dial some knobs and be like, it should be gone now.
Oh.
But we don't, the FDA in the United States doesn't allow electromedicine. It's just not on the radar. But every cell in our body has double the number of electromagnetic receptors than it does chemical receptors. So electricity is super manipulating and, I don't know what the word is, destructive or inferior, or not inferior. Like our body is really tuned to electrical frequencies more so than chemical frequencies. Mm. So she started, the biggest problem she had was she published her book. Mm-hmm. I think on page like 10, she's like, go to Radio Shack and get these 9 parts, stick them together with alligator clips, put them on some copper tubing and hold on to it, and you will cure yourself. Oh. And once the cure word was used, the government just like destroyed her. I think she moved to Tijuana and still opened a clinic there, and you could go and see her. I think she's still alive today.
But if that technology is so cheap and simple,
it's
yeah. Why don't you use? I'm not going to say why do people, because
I'm not leaving. I'm right here. I'm just going to track it.
I finally asked a question that chased a guest away. Well, it took 93 shows, but he's coming back.
You did it.
That's it. I'm out of here. So you can buy these things, right? You can buy these devices, and they come in different flavors, right? These come from Germany, and where they're not so strict over there. Mm-hmm. You know, here's one of them here. Dr. Clark's Research Association. Oh,
so he has Dr. Clark. I thought that name would stump you or something. No, actually I didn't, because you mentioned your interest in knowledge in that.
Yeah.
And so does it work? That's what our viewers are asking. How could it possibly work and nobody's ever heard of it? You know, that's always the question.
Yeah. Thank your local government. Yeah. So first of all, they come in different price ranges. You can buy one there is no Radio Shack anymore. You could go to Radio Shack and for $15, you could buy the components. There's different versions of this thing. Mm-hmm. This one right up there has what's kind of like a SIM card. Mm-hmm. And remember when I said she just sweeps for everything?
Yeah.
Well, it kills the good bacteria too. So it will wipe out your gut bacteria. And for like 2 or 3 days afterwards, you have to eat some yogurt. You have to take probiotics. And for women, it would give them yeast infections. That was their biggest problem. So then they started going, why don't we just narrow down specific problems? And we'll just hit those particular frequencies only. Mm-hmm. So if you're like, I got the flu, or I don't know, my throat hurts. I think I spelled bacteria wrong.
Right. So what are you saying then? I mean, literally the title of her book was The Cure for All Diseases.
Yeah, I know that. And I think that was
aggressive.
Yeah, that's her problem. You know, first of all, like, I don't think it cures all diseases. I think what the mistake that she made or didn't know is that the body is more complicated than just this one thing is causing this one thing. Yeah. So there can be a cascade of effects, right? Like, so you could get like the influenza virus, which lowers your immune system, and then you'd get a cold, or maybe you'd get eczema or something like that. So you'd go after the eczema, but it was really the cold. Like, it's too complicated to know. Yeah. But that's why she was like, it's a little complicated, so we're just going to sweep for everything. And sweeping so I've had my story is that, like, I had the flu, like, really bad. And I was supposed to go to an alchemy conference and speak on stage. And I had the book. And at the time, my wife was like, I cannot go. There's no way by Friday I'm going to be well. I haven't eaten in 4 days. I had a fever. It was a Tuesday. And I'm just going to sit here and keep reading this book. And she's like, you're reading a book that's called The Cure for All Diseases. Like, obviously it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, I have to buy these parts, these 8 parts, like right here from Radio Shack. And she's like, what if I go get them? And she went and got them, and I stuck them together, and I shocked myself. I treated myself. You grab it for 20 minutes, you wait 8, do another 20 minutes, wait 8. I was flush, alert, hungry, got up the next day, was like, I feel pretty good. Went to Sacramento, was up there. On Friday, I was on the conference, giving a talk. And then that evening I was like, shit, I think that thing worked. And so then I started buying all the parts from Radio Shack and making them. And this company called like Jaguar Medicine approached me and was like, we'd love for you to manufacture them. How much do they cost you? And I'm like, wait, do I really tell you how much they cost me?
No.
Or is this that point where I tell you it was like $99?
Yeah.
And the guy's like, he goes, look, I'm honest, man. You tell me how much they cost. We'll figure out how you can make a lot of money. And I'm like, it cost me $15 at Radio Shack. And he's like, okay, your price is $99. I'm going to sell those things for $200. This guy went on and sold a ton of them. And on his website, he said they cure everything. And the FDA came in and shut him down and ordered him to pay $70,000 back to every single person who placed an order. Gosh. And every person who placed the order said, we don't want the money back. We want the device.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, take the money back. And it just shut him down. And so I was like, I'm not going to do this. This is crazy. Like, but I use it on myself when I don't feel good.
Oh, well, good deal. At least it's helped. Somebody's getting some good out of it. Yeah.
And you can buy them you can buy them. They come, there's Dr. Clark Research Institute. There's a place called, I don't know, if you Google the Zapper, you can buy them on Amazon. They make little tiny ones with little copper contacts.
Mm-hmm.
I felt so bad once. I didn't even have the energy to hold onto the copper things, and I just dropped them in the bathtub. I was like, this either kill me or fix me, and just turn the thing on. It was like, it's doing the same thing. As long as the water's a little dirty and soapy, there's a lot of good conductivity. And God damn, if I didn't feel better.
Well, Gwen, I know you're going to jump in. You're watching the time here. We don't want to keep Jason too far over. I've got like a couple more questions that I really am dying to get in. But please go ahead. I'm sure you have some things to ask too.
I do. I have one more question I want to ask you about. And this is going to veer off again a little bit. You have said that you have followed and spoken with Bob Lazar many times over the years. We all know that Bob Lazar is still a controversial subject, even after all of the years. And those of us who are in this field absolutely know that. So I'm assuming that if you followed him, that you think he's a good guy. What makes you think that he is really real and that what he says is true?
Well, I don't have an opinion one way or the other, because I'll just let the community just torture that out of him. Right. Like the people just tear you to shreds in the media.
That's right.
But when I say that I've followed and interacted with him a lot, I've interacted with him one time, but followed him a lot. Right. So, and we interacted in his professional capacity, not Mr. Area 51. And when I switched the tone to like, aren't you the guy from Area 51? He cut off the conversation. Wow. So he owns a company called United Nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's called, United Nuclear.
Yeah, it's like United Nuclear.
Yeah, and it's like it's almost like a novelty science. Like you can get a crystal radio kit for your kids. You can get some glow in the dark uranium paints. Like it's a cool, fun thing, and it's all sciencey. It's a little bit like, where did you get this stuff? Like some of that stuff is like, like you just want to accidentally see, like, is that element 115? Can I order that stuff from you guys? Right. And the thing is that I followed him since 1988 when I think I don't remember when he went to George Knapp. I think it was like 1984. I can't remember. Or I can't remember, but I was following the Desert Rat. And he started, all of a sudden, it was like a big day when Bob Lazar came out and started talking about all this stuff. But Jeremy Corbell and those guys who really dug in to see like the legitimacy of him are like, the main thing this guy said was like, that there was this bone scanner for entering Area 51. And he said this like to George Knapp in like the 90s. And it's recorded. It's like a device that you put your hand on that looks like a flatbed scanner, but it had these metal prongs that stuck up. And he's like, it was like an X-ray machine. And it would scan your hand and it would look at your bones and measure your bones. And it would use that for entry. And it didn't exist. And George Knapp and everyone's like, there's no such thing as these things. But Jeremy Corbell, like, what, 30, 40 years later, found them and was like, the government was using these machines. And Bob Lazar, that's it. That's the thing I was talking to you about. Like, they have a couple of them. So he's like, Jeremy Corbell was like, once I found that device, he's like, the validation was like massive. But for me personally, it was that he was talking about Area 51, which is really cool. Could have all been made up, the whole thing. I don't even care, because it was super cool. I was just really into it. But he would talk when people would deviate off of his story. Like, so what do you do? What's your life like? He would describe things like, well, in my backyard, I have a giant ring of PVC that's like 100 feet long. And he made his own particle accelerator. And he was decaying like deuterium into hydroxium or something. And it was like a metal that he was putting in scuba tanks and then heating it in his Corvette and making hydrogen and running his car off of hydrogen. And he's like, this metal you can't buy because it's on the list of like nuclear devices that the government doesn't allow. He's like, but you can make it as long as you know how to make a particle accelerator. And he had like red blinking lights in his backyard that would blink when the particle accelerator was active. So, and when he would describe that stuff, I'm like, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. Like because the Area 51 stuff, there was no way for me to be like, I dug in deep to everything he was talking about. Gravity wave generators. He was like, the ships don't fly this way. They fly this way. They have like 3 emitters that are focused. They pull the stuff to you. Like even like this, like these are the patents now. The Navy has patents on these devices, like craft using inertia mass reduction devices. Like these are the Tic Tac devices, right? That they're flying right now that we're like, UFOs are everywhere. The patent has the Tic Tac on it. Like it's right here. These are like crew compartments. This patent alone is called high frequency gravitational wave generator. And it says that it's licensed to the United States of America representative of the Navy, patented permanently to them in 2012. No, this one's 2019.
What was the title again of that one? I want to look that up.
Yeah, so this is a good, like, I would start with this one, right? Okay. This one is for your readers.
Or just a number even. Yeah. Well, whatever you want to. Yeah.
Patent number 101445532. Craft using an internal mass reduction device.
Internal mass reduction.
Yeah. So in this illustration, he shows the craft with this shape. That box in the middle, that's a crew compartment in terms of size. So this is the first patent that they released, or not the first, but this is one of the patents that you released that kind of went public. People were like, internal mass reduction. Like that, just that. People are like, what? Mass reduction? That's levitating? So then the same author comes out with this thing, which is the patent high frequency gravitational wave generator. And this patent is 103222827. And this one has literally the illustration of the Tic Tac on it. And those are microwave emitters. This thing, like, this patent explains how the Tic Tac works, like from the physics perspective. And so like I was reading these, he's like, here's how these things work. And if you put it up this way, this is some of the stuff, like these angled sliced wedges are kind of like some of the things that Bob Lazar was drawing. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. This is like, so do you guys know the Tic Tac incident, right? Like the Nimitz battle group, 5,000 guys, they were chasing this thing down. Well, the US Navy on the FAA flight record had a channel open from Area 51 to the Pacific at 65,000 feet that was cleared that whole time. And so people were like, they have to register it. They basically just go, hey, this is open. it's ours. Don't mess with us for these 3 weeks. It was open the whole time. So people were like, why was there an air channel open between Area 51 at 65,000 feet over to the Pacific during the entire 3 weeks of the Nimitz battle carrier team? So most likely these guys have this. They built it. It's not complicated. It really isn't. And the first good place to test it would be during a test of our own. The guy who was flying around was a Top Gun naval instructor. He had a team of like multiple other pilots doing sorties that day, all of which recorded this thing. They shot video of it. They chased it. They tried. But I don't have any idea what you, I mean, other than the fact that you could get inside this thing and go, I think they've clocked them at 27,000 miles an hour, but that's nothing compared to how fast it could actually go if it was outside of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So when I look at stuff like this, and then I look at things like, oh, the James Webb Telescope, the photos are beautiful. I don't think there's a telescope out there. I think there's some guy out there taking those pictures with an iPhone.
Why not?
He's like, damn, look at Saturn. Hold up. And then we get those and we're like, oh my God.
99 or something. What they have, the technology. We're stuck on 11 or 12.
We're 300 years behind where they're at in our world. Yeah.
Well, let me just get in my last couple here, because I want to ask about, speaking of 300 years or more, I want to talk about alchemy. I want you to talk about alchemy. And I brought up the company Orion up in Canada, which I've actually invested my own money. And so I got a very personal.
You got to send me the link to those guys too, because I would love to like dig into it more. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, what I mean, in a nutshell, what they went to test the electric universe model. I think
theory.
Much more. It's much better at predicting the things that we actually observe. Speaking of electricity being at the basis of biology and everything else. So they went to test that model in terms of the sun being driven in large part by
100%. It's 100% electrical device. Yes.
Yeah, not nuclear, blah, 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 that we've been taught for forever.
It's cooler at the center than it is at the outer edge.
Yeah, the corona is a million degrees.
2 million degree corona. Yeah.
Yeah. So what they were tasked, they were paid to test the model. And so what they did is they went to these are some high-powered scientists. I mean, with all the credentials you need, it's a dozen or so, plus a lot of advisors. And so they went and they tested, they created a sun in the laboratory. Yeah. Under this model with plasma. I'm not a physics guy. I don't understand the exact, but I understand what they
are explaining,
proved, and what they were able to explain. And what they noted kind of as a side discovery was that they transmuted elements in that. It shouldn't.
I mean, the sun is accidentally transmuting elements.
Right. So they discovered that so they not only validated the electric universe model in that particular case, at least, but they discovered something incredible, mind-blowing. It's modern alchemy. There's no other way to put it. So I want to
so it's not modern, right? It's just that it's very hidden. And so
it's a modern discovery of the same.
That's a good way of putting it. My like, I don't know, bedside table reading is a magazine called Nexus. NEXUS. And everyone out there who's listening should go to the Nexus website, Nexus magazine, and like either subscribe to their digital version or get a copy of the magazine. They're published outside of the United States, and almost everything they publish that they tell you about inside the United States, or though it's happening, the US is blocking. So you'll read about these stories and you're like, this happened in Switzerland, and you don't hear about them in the United States. But they covered a story probably in the 90s about the electric universe and the electric sun, and it's totally spot on. The only thing that we're missing is that you create a condition like a plasma sphere, but they're shooting in electricity, and where the two nodes are intersecting is where the effect is happening. So our sun has, invisible because we can't see everything in the electromagnetic, it has an intersection between some type of energy that's overlapping right at a particular point and creating a node that's creating the sun. And we do this all the time. It's scalar waves and interferometers and things like this. And so we can create opposing and all kinds of different oscillations electromagnetically. So you could easily, Tesla's death ray work that way. He'd sweep one ray, and then right where he'd sweep another one at that particular point, you'd have a directed energy weapon. That's how the sun is created. And so at the point where those two things happen, the kind of ignition point would cause a kind of an explosion in a sphere pattern in space. So that's why the center of the sun has really no temperature to it, and boom, it just kind of ignites. Now, what happens is the transmutation, I can't remember, I'm gonna get it wrong, from hydrogen to helium or helium to hydrogen, and that's transmutation, the converting of elements from one to the other.
Right.
But all of everything that we're talking about, the fringe energy, the secret technologies, all of this stuff is continuously rediscovered on like a 100-year cycle. And there's a guy out there, his name's John Sajeka, and he was friends with John Bedini. And John Bedini found out, was like an agent of a Russian agent who lived in the US, he thought, who was responsible for quelling all the people who were continuously rediscovering technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So he has an enormous collection of the technologies, like aluminum air batteries, water-powered this, transmutation, all kinds of things that John Sajeka kept, because every time they sprung up in the news, John Sajeka would go and meet those people and talk to them. And like, I don't know what he really did, but John would tell me, he's like, I was driving with this guy. He got pulled over and pulled out a card and gave it to the police officer and was like, this guy's going to waste my time, and handed it back through the window and was like, I'm sorry about this, Mr. Sajeka, you can go. And he's like, I thought he was like a diplomat, but he lived in like Iowa. So the Sajeka files, these are patents that John Sajeka collected, and articles from the news and the media and stuff that, if you get a hold of them, are a revolutionary collection of all of these things that work. And like there's some stuff in there that's like, there's a bacteria that if you release it in a creek, the bacteria collects gold. It's what it does. It uses it to protect itself on that level. So if you have a stream that's running down a mountain and you spray it with this bacteria and you come back like 4 years later, it's filled with gold. Like people will. And so there was a member of the US government that was like, we found this bacteria, it's always covered with gold. And we were always wondering why there'd be a mountain that doesn't have any gold in it, but there'd be a river that's full of gold that was running off of this mountain. They're like, it's because of this one bacteria, and it collects it electromagnetically. It's the exact same frequency for collecting gold. So the guy was like, I decided to take the bacteria and fill it in a river. And sure enough, 10 years later, they were panning gold out of it. And Sajeka has all these kind of files like collected. And he gave them to John Bearden, I think at the time of his death. And John gave them to me. Like, they're in the public domain. I think you can get a hold of them, and they're like 50 of the craziest PDFs I've ever read.
How do you spell that last name? Do you
It's
remember?
it's CEJ. And I have the file. I'm just gonna look up. Yeah, it's a really weird last name.
Sounds like some fun.
Let me look in my free energy folder here. Sajeka is CEJKA, the Sajeka files. It's like the X files. Yeah, so some of the articles are like a mysterious ore, a dynamic model of cell membranes, the German cancer therapy, the aluminum air battery. And these are all things that he actively found and then suppressed. The Bedini devices for spaceflight, the wonders of bee pollen, electrofying plastics. This guy built, this is one of the last stories I'll tell about this guy. He built some kind of electromagnet that picked up non-ferrous metal objects. And he was at an event where there was a guy who had all these gold coins, and he told him, my electromagnet is very special. If I use it and pick up one of your gold coins, can I have it? And the guy threw handfuls of gold coins on the floor in front of a studio audience. And John Sajeka put this thing over it and just collected like probably $100,000 worth. And the guy was like, they're yours, man. I don't have any idea what that was. So he knew where physics broke down and could explain where they stopped telling the public the real aspects of physics that we needed to basically unify the grand unified field theory. And so he's like, this is where they cut it off at this point in time, because we just don't want the next generation to go and make free energy devices and then collapse the economic model, because we don't need any system, you know?
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. So let me just ask one question. I know we're out of
Yeah.
time here, totally out of time. We want to respect your time, of course, Jason, but really appreciate that you've been with us. And also, I would love to have you come back too.
Sure.
If you want to
Yeah.
continue the chat, because it could go a long time. But
Yeah. I mean, we could dive into a specific sector.
Yeah.
We
It's broad
could,
brush.
right. And is
Mhm.
there a website
Oh,
or
yeah.
something if people want to contact you? An
I mean,
email
my
address,
website is just
something.
Opus is a good website, one, because I'm on the Opus website, and anything that's sent to any of the contacts, there's a contact section on Opus. I get those emails too, but my personal website is jasonwolf.com. But a lot of that is professional work, video production work that I've done, the About Me section, but I have a contact section in there too. And I get all those emails too. I get the craziest like emails.
Okay. And so the Opus website is opusnetwork.org. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's a .org. Yeah.
Okay.
I think if you type into Google alien abduction, Opus comes up near like one of the tops now. We've been working on that.
Okay. Can you leave us with just some thoughts about what you've made mention of this cycle that happens, and there are gatekeepers, you know, like
yeah.
guy.
So
what do you think it'll take to break that cycle? Are we on the cusp of breaking it?
So I'm gonna answer Linda Moulton Howe's answer. Like I try to answer from my perspective of like, oh, the moment that I get like John Bedini, he created a free energy device. He believed that you could get more energy out of it, or at least it could be a very equal system. He unplugged his shop from the electric grid. He filed for a US patent. The bullets started appearing in his mailbox that just had the word stop written on it with like a Sharpie. And he said that he just got too scared. And so he pulled his patent and put it into the public domain and said, I don't care what you do with it. You can't sell it. And so if you look up the Bedini patents, they're public now, and he's never monetized them. So that's one way you think, I'm going to change the world. But not everyone can make those kind of things. And then you get an enormous amount of people who are like, that's fake, don't even bother. And then you jump ahead 10 years and you're like, I've kind of heard of that guy's name. How do you spell it? And it's gone. And then you jump ahead a decade or sorry, a generation. And then you're like, my crazy uncle used to know this guy who built electrical devices. And then our every 100-year cycle kind of starts over again. Right. And so we get into these phases and these cycles of like repression, held back. And then you go, why is anybody doing this? Obviously, there's people that's got to be 80 years old in the government that want to tell the Roswell story. And when they tell the story and die, we'll all be free. No. So Linda Moulton Howe takes it to a step that's way beyond, that's dark, that is, there's a race of aliens that created us, that control us, that we're running in their time frame, that we're running on their particular cycle. And it puts it into a perspective where you're like, I don't have control over it.
Yeah.
But there's also layers within among us where there's us, and then there's the government, and then there may be entities that are, she says there's 5 entities that exist in interacting with us, from the grays, which are just artificially intelligent beings with consciousness downloaded. They're not actual biological people. There's biological beings that come. And then there's another race that comes, and she's like, one of them is not very nice to us and has the ability to use sonoluminance to project to us what we want us to see. And she's like, they can be around and manipulate and change things and change the course of our time and our history and our place. And so I watch some of that and I go to bed and I'm like, forget it. And then I wake up the next day and I'm like, no, I'm not going to forget it. I'm just going to keep pushing forward and making these things. And so I don't know how you break a particular cycle. I think you can like act locally and give things away locally and be more community focused. And you can try to give things away globally, but somebody controls a lot of the global communication and messaging. And there's a lot of tainted stuff out there. And so it's the only way is really the kind of method that we're doing right now, to try and talk amongst ourselves through these channels that still let us do that, you know?
Well, well put. Well,
Wonderful.
take us out, Gwen, then.
Yeah.
Thank you. A pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, it was great.
And we do look forward to seeing you again.
Okay.
Take
Yeah, I
care.
would love to talk to you guys again.
Okay.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Good night. All right. Bye.
Bye.